anything, like, I don't know, a garage. But no, we made him take them all up and then take them all back down when we shipped them back out, because we were crack business guys. Suffice to say, it all came due one day, and it came due in the best of all possible ways. And that was that the fellow who ran the warehouse at Sun eventually quit and moved on, and Sun didn't replace him for quite a long while, like 9 months. And in the meantime, I had nobody to call up. Literally, they said, oh, just to hold on to them. Well, I wasn't going to go buying motherboards because they fall in price over time. I said, I'll just wait till they call. Well, 9 months passed, and I just wasn't paying attention to the number of motherboards I owed them. And a rather astonishing number were sort of backlogged, like thousands. And finally, some poor schmo gets this job. And of course, we are the celebrated Sun workstation reseller in the US. I mean, we are the best of the best. We were being treated with reverence by these guys by this point. And this poor guy calls me up one day and says, Mr. Richard, see, I'm Mr. Richard now. And he says, Mr. Richard, I have to apologize at the beginning of this conversation, but we have lost like 2,700 workstations that you've shipped back to us. And I thought, you've lost them, huh? Huh. So have I. I said, gosh, I don't know what to do. He goes, well, I was just rather hoping that you had noted down the serial numbers of the motherboards before you shipped them off. I said, no, I hadn't. I've just always trusted you guys. Now, you may think that I'm a terrible person. You should by now, certainly. Because I did get my businesses started, shall we say, in a rather street sort of manner. We sold ITEL eventually, about 2 years after that, to a fellow who thought we were in the workstation business. And things went fine. And my brother went off chasing a girl to Northern California, and I started my second company, and I'm building up to that mistake right now. The second company was my first, in many ways, proper business, in the sense that I started it with a specific intent and grew it with a specific intent, with a specific outcome in mind. I admit the outcome that we had wasn't the outcome I had in mind, but at least I had an intent, which said a lot over my first company. And it was called Visual Software. A friend of mine and I, John Halloran, who was a unique fellow. He was the lead physicist on the Stealth project. He had a brain the size of the Earth. But he was a very unconventional person. So he would not wear long trousers, and he wouldn't eat used food, whatever the heck that means. So if food had ever been used, so like if milk had been opened, can't touch that. And so you couldn't really trot John out in front of other people. But he was very, very, very smart, right? And so that was cool. And he and I and another fellow, who was actually stranger than John, come to think of it, Frank, decided to start a company that would revolutionize 3D graphics and animation for the film and TV industry. And they had both been heavily involved in this, and I talked fast, and so we thought we were a pretty good combo, and they thought I was a celebrated workstation reseller. And we started Visual Software. We each kicked in a bit of capital. We had just enough money to write the software. We were going to bring 3D graphics from workstations to PCs, cut 90% off the price, rip everyone else's hearts and throats out, and take over the entire industry. It was a fantastic business plan. That was the business plan, that was the whole thing. And so we started, and we hired a small team of programmers, and off we set. And for almost 2 years, we all survived on the capital we'd stuck in, and we wrote this software. And what we were depending on, in large part, was that PCs would be powerful enough to run our software by the time the software was done, and Intel had assured us it would be the case. And so when 2 years passed and our software was ready to ship, it was really quite unfortunate that Intel had fallen behind, and that they were like running a year behind on their schedule. And they apologized. They said, sorry, And we said, shit, because they hiccup, we die. It didn't seem like a fair relationship. And I just faithfully remember the meeting where John, Frank, and I sat around the room. And they turned to me for reasons, for strange, and said, so what are we going to do? And I said, well, why are you turning to me? They said, well, we're developers, you're sales. This is your job, Doug. And I said, I have no idea what we're going to do, to be honest. And John said, well, I tell you what I can do. I said, what's that, John? He said, I can take all this software that, if we put it on today's PC, we'll turn that, we'll just make the PC really sluggish. It'll just grind it. Smoke will come out of the corners. He said, and I can just cut away all the stuff that slows it down. I said, well, isn't that the stuff that does stuff? And he says, yeah. He said, but I can cut all that out. I said, but then what'll it do? He goes, nothing. I said, well, what good's that? He said, we can show people what it would do if it did anything. I said, So it's like a demo. He goes, yeah, like a demo. And he said, I'll even write a Windows interface for you this weekend, because that's what he did on the weekends. And so he went home, wrote a Windows interface, cut out all the shit that did stuff, slapped it together, and gave it to me on Monday on a CD and said, look at that, huh? Pretty cool. And could you do anything? Well, you could hit a button, pretty pictures would come out, and that's something. And I said, fine, I'll use it as a proof statement. I'll tell you what, John, I'm going to go to this big computer show. At the time, it was the biggest computer show in the world, called Comdex in Las Vegas, and I'm going to go try to flog consulting services. We're going to teach other people how to do rendering and graphics and animation until such time. It was a pretty desperate plan. And I hired a guy to come with me because I didn't really want to be in the booth alone. In fact, more to the point, I wanted him to stay in the booth. And as people came along, heaven forbid they wanted our consulting services, he would give them qualify them, write down their information and say, could you use this stuff? And only then give them one of our very rare and precious CDs, because we'd only printed like 600 of them, and that was kind of it. And I hired a guy named Kevin, who was a friend of John's, more sociable than John, and a friend of John's. So Kevin and I went off, and I put him in we were in the smallest booth in the back of the biggest room, in back of the worst part of Comdex. And it's a big show. 250,000 people would come to this show every year. It's a huge, massive show. And I put Kevin in that booth, and I said, right, Kevin, you just stand there and do what I told you. I'm going to go off and beg for consulting with large corporations. And I vividly remember coming back at the end of the first day, walking to the other end of this huge exhibition hall, and seeing our booth, because we only did 3D, everybody else did 2D graphics. We had put a little sign up saying Simply 3D, nothing else. And I just remember seeing that little Simply 3D sign and seeing people 10 foot deep around our booth waving money. And I'm thinking to myself, that is so peculiar. As we're not selling anything, God, so I rush across the room, and I'm pushing my way through all these people, and there's Kevin, and he's handing out CDs, and he's taking cash. And I'm thinking, what? So I grab Kevin, I drag him behind this little curtain we had, and I said to him, well, I actually said to him, with really great deal of vigor, what the heck are you doing? But I used other words. And he said, Doug, I am selling so much software. And I said, Kevin, it doesn't do anything. He goes, yeah, but I'm only charging $50. Now, that's an interesting notion if you think about it. You've got permission for it to be completely ineffective if it's cheap enough. Actually, in the software industry, that's probably true. We call it version 1, right? Can you imagine if refrigerators were like that? It's like, this is a version 1 refrigerator. It'll just hold your stuff. Version 2 will cool them as well. Yeah. That's an upgrade next year. Yeah. Let's face it, the software industry gets away with just utter sin. But that wasn't my mistake. Anyway, so I'm shaking Kevin, and I said, Kevin, I'm really concerned. All these people, they're going to go home. They're going to stick this CD into a computer and find out, it doesn't do anything. And he goes, Doug, that is just not what you should be concerned about. And I said, what should I be concerned about, Kevin? He goes, well, like half an hour, he's so California, like half an hour ago, Doug. Half an hour ago, the largest retailer of computers in the US came by, and I just took a stocking order for 100,000 units for Christmas. In fairness to Kevin, he was right. I was way worrying about the wrong thing. So we went back to LA, and we had another meeting. It was Doug, John, Frank, and Kevin, because it was certainly as much his fault as anybody else. And we're all sitting around, and they're all saying, so what do we do, Doug? I'd been nominated leader, I guess, so that when we were in front of the judge, they could say it was his fault. Your Honor, we just followed orders. And so we did what any normal software company would do. We took a deep breath, and we decided to fulfill the 100,000 unit order, having sold, 600 copies of a CD that didn't do anything. And it was interesting to me because, we shipped it. We actually went into the box business. We called up Sony Corporation of America, who then printed CDs, and we did a lot of stuff. And this order went out, and it was all fabulously exciting. And you can get away with this stuff in the US without any cash, because you can basically take the purchase order and hand it off to the other guy, and he prints it all, and he gets the money, and you get it. And so it's doable if you talk really fast. And we did that part, but this underlying nagging concern I had that I was shipping demo software just wouldn't go away, as you might imagine. And in hindsight, I was wrong. I was just completely, profoundly, heroically wrong. Because our software, it doesn't do anything. Even to this day, that really didn't change. But it didn't do anything in the right way, in the sense it was artistic. It was hobbyist software. It was fun. People were buying it knowing what it didn't do. I was the only one who was oblivious to the notion that it actually had to accomplish something. It's really been kind of an insight to me over these years that you can sell stuff that does nothing. I've gotten much better at it. But at the time, the notion that, that Kevin was right and I was wrong completely eclipsed me. And it did set the company on its way. That software went on to sell in the millions, actually. Probably 7 million units are out there across the world in one guise or another. And I made a fair penny on it, as you can imagine. And I toast Kevin at least once a week, because thank God for Kevin's all I can say. Fast forward 3 years, same trade show. We're coming real close to that mistake. This is the longest version of telling you the biggest mistake of my life I've ever taken. I have no idea why. Be that as it may, 3 years later, same trade show, same booth. And well, not same booth, huge booth. John was in the back now. That was his concession to being public. He sat behind the curtain for most of the 3 days, and worried. And we were feeling quite robust, kind of cool. We were selling millions of copies of software. We now had 2 products. We doubled our inventory. And the guy walks into the booth, and more or less, it was a little more complicated of a discussion. He pretty much walks in and says, "Hi, I'm the CEO of the 4th largest public software company in the US, and I want to buy your company." And I said, "Just don't move." And I ran behind the curtain and said, "John wants to buy our company." John says, "Well, then do it." I said, "Right." Rush back out front. Thank God you have partners for advice, right? And I talked to the guy, and I didn't realize that you don't just agree a price in the first 20 minutes. I thought, what the heck, seems reasonable to me. And he put the kind of number in front of you want in life. It had ones, it had zeros, it had commas, they were long. And I'm thinking, whoa. I said, ran back behind the curtain, "John, number, yes, good." This guy must have thought I was fucking insane. He's like, "Don't move. I've got a partner. Let me see him." "No, you can't see him. That'll ruin the whole deal. He'll think you're used." When John was feeling social, he looked at your shoes, right? He was not the kind of person you wanted to put in front of a buyer. Forgive me, John, wherever you may be. But it's true, and that's the problem, isn't it? And so we took his offer. And about 2 weeks later, all the paper was written up, and there were 2 conditions on the sale of Visual Software to this very large public corporation. The first condition was that myself, as the CEO, had to move from West Hollywood Hills, California, to Dallas, Texas, where they were headquartered, for 6 months to help merge the companies. And the second condition was, as was very typical of the time, that we would use an accounting transaction of a form where they would give us shares in their public company. We would wait 100 days, which is the minimum lockup period, and then we would be able to sell them on the public market, take our cash, and go our happy ways. I can so tell this is not an American audience. If I had said in the United States that I was moving from LA to Dallas, you guys would have gone, You realize it's more than 2,000 miles, right? It's 200 years back in time, right? In fact, apropos of nothing, I remember going home that very same day when I saw those conditions and saying to my wife, "Sweetheart, I have good news and more news." I've sold the company. We have to move to Dallas. And my wife's not American, so like you, she just didn't get it, thank God. But she called a friend. This is completely going off track now, but she called her best friend, Gigi, and this is very LA. And she says, "Gigi, Doug's company's been sold. We have to move to Dallas." And Gigi, without even breathing, says, "Oh, are you going to divorce him or go with him?" As though they were perfectly evenly balanced alternatives in the universe. Anyways, Carolina made the mistake. She came with me. Shit happened. No, the mistake's now just 89 days away. So we move. And on day 89, at 9 a.m. East Coast time, when the U.S. stock markets opened, the share price in this parent corporation fell by 99%, and I was wiped out. So the wealth of 2 companies in 10 years evaporated. Now, unbeknownst to me, up until that moment, the company that had acquired me was in very bad shape, and they'd been lying to people, including me. And in fact, the reason they'd purchased us was because we were part of the disguise of messing up the accounts. It's much more complex than that, but suffice to say this is the short version. And they were using us as part of the foil for Wall Street, but they got caught. They got discovered. And so, of course, the share price fell, and what I then owned was a very large quantity of paper in a very large corporation that was worth next to nothing. Right, so this is where that whole mindset things come in, doesn't it? By the way, we've just reached my mistake, in case you're wondering. Mistake. Turns out to be a very big one, you know, so if you actually sit there and quantify it, it's long. And it's not remarkably dissimilar from the piece of paper he handed to me with those ones and zeros on it. A miraculous, you know, sort of similarity in size. Be that as it may, this is not really related now, but I figured I might as well finish what I've started here now that I'm on a roll. What happened next was I sulked, actually, technically, for about 5 days until my wife said to me, you know, you're just kind of a bother. You need to get out of the house and do something about it. And I thought to myself, yeah, right, like, what am I going to do about that? She goes, well, I don't know, but I suggest you figure something out, because you don't just have a lot of paper. You also have a very large house in Dallas, which I may have rather impulsively purchased, that had a huge mortgage attached to it, which apparently comes with the big houses, and 3 young children to feed. And, you know, this had escaped me during my sulk. And so she kind of kicked me out of the house and said, come back when you've got a thought or two. And so I went up to New York to talk to the analysts and everybody else who'd been, and the investors and the funds that had backed this company, because this is a public company. Many institutions had lost far more than I, though I certainly didn't feel that way at the time. And I remember I met my first ever fund manager, and it was really a fascinating experience, because I sat there and she was willing to meet with me quite quickly. And I said to her, so what are you going to do about this? And she said, you don't understand. I'm a fund manager. We don't do anything. And I thought, I'm going to remember that. Because I've learned to my chagrin, investors don't, do they really, do much anything. And she said, but interestingly enough, I was going to ask you the same question. Because as to the two of us, you're the one who's stuck in Texas, right? So what are you going to do about it? Now, I was at an age where I was of the ready, fire, aim mentality of prior planning. And so I thought to myself, what am I going to do about it? I mean, how hard can it be to run this company? I mean, they've done a crap job of it, right? And it was perfectly obvious to me in the 80 days I'd been there. I remind you of my prior employment experience. I could always see ways that my bosses could do a better job. I had calculated all the different ways in which they were making huge numbers of mistakes. Now, you may say, what prior experience did I have to do something about it? You know, I run a company of 40 people. They had 7,000. I'd had 2 products. They had 600. I had 1 office. They had subsidiaries in 17 countries. I figured close enough. And so I actually mounted a hostile takeover of the company that had taken me over and succeeded and installed myself as the global president and CEO of the 4th largest public software company in the United States. Now, if you want to know where attitude will take you, that's about as far as you can go. To round the story out, I then called all the executives of this company together from all over the world. It took a few days, and they all came there. And I put them all in a room, and I fired their sorry asses. I mean, it's 12 years later, and I'm still smiling about it. I mean, now you're wondering why they put me on Dragon's Den. Now you know. And I'm not really suggesting that you be motivated by revenge. I'm just saying it worked for me. Just so we're perfectly clear, that's the 2nd largest mistake I have ever made. It took me 17 quarters, 4¼ years running this company to eventually successfully turn it around. It took a couple of tries, and I did eventually successfully turn it around and sell it, and I learned much of what I know about business today from that extremely painful, really unpleasant experience of running a large corporation, and I shall never do it again. I shall never also fire people for revenge again. I think that's probably rather short-sighted. But I did feel a very good closure, as we say in California, about it all, and it still makes me happy. Look, I'm happy. And it led me up to the point where actually I left the US and came here. No, they didn't run me out, I just left. But we went from Texas and moved here to London. And then a couple years later, you saw me on TV. What's interesting to me is if you look at my other mistakes, my 3rd biggest mistake, and I'm going to stop there because they fall off in quantity from here, was shortly before, and there was a very small interlude after I mounted the hostile takeover, and I, much to my own surprise as much as anybody else's, succeeded in it, I got called up by a recruiter. So it was like a 3-week window. And the recruitment specialist said that Microsoft had just purchased this company in Montreal that was a 3D graphics and animation software company. And the recruiter admitted, he said, you know, and there's just not a lot of CEOs of 3D graphics and animation companies in the world. And there's very, very few of them that, like, aren't busy right now. So I said, well, so what are you saying? He says, you're it. You know, you come to Montreal. They'd like to hire you. I said, they haven't even met me. He said, pretty thin pickings right now. And I thought, I'll take that as a compliment. And so my wife and I flew to Montreal. And if you've ever been to Montreal in like November, it is dark and it is cold. I hadn't been to England yet, so I had no idea. And so I thought, oh my God, this is a terrible place. How could anyone live so far north? It's Montreal's south of England, just so we all put this in context. But it is. It's much colder and much darker, and it's bitterly cold winters. And we stepped off the plane, and my wife and I looked at each other and said, no way, we're not staying here. And we agreed. I mean, it was a mutual mistake. And we flew home, or flew back to Texas. That was a job in, I don't know if this will mean too much to you, but it was paid, amongst other things, in 1996 Microsoft options. You want to know what a breathtaking number is. It was number 3 on the list with a rocket. Huge amount of money I turned down, it turns out, in hindsight. But hindsight has been very effective for me. So, I can look back with an enormous amount of accuracy. I came to the UK about 8 years ago, and I started business. I went back to what I enjoy doing, which is starting companies. And I have, for most of my life, been an entrepreneur, albeit a rather accidental one, and not necessarily the best entrepreneur. I do take the view that I have 2 things going for me. Number 1, I am a deeply, deeply optimistic person without really any justification for it. And I have a huge amount of faith in my own abilities. And I would repeat once again, there's not a lot of reason for me to have been so optimistic and so confident as I was. I mean, I'm of the confident, not competent crowd, apparently. And over the years, as I've gotten, as you can see, much older and more cynical, bitter, and twisted, I began to start investing in other companies, especially when I came over here. And all of a sudden, I found I had my second insightful moment. I've only had 2 in 25 years, and I can share them in less than 45 minutes. It says the sum of Doug's wisdom is not much. But in short, I had my second insight. My second insight was, oh, look, it's the confident ones who keep winning. It's the ones who wake up in the morning and do stuff that keep winning. And so I kept on running into these wonderful young companies. And I mean young in the sense of being early in their startup life. The entrepreneurs were of all shapes, size, description, and everything else. But they were all very young as entrepreneurs. And I kept on picking the wrong ones when I started angel investing. I was picking ones where I thought it was a cool product or a cool idea or a cool whatever. Made less difference than I could have possibly imagined. What made a difference at the end of the day, oddly enough, was the ones who stood up and got something done, and the ones who had confidence. And even when they didn't have confidence, they had confidence. I mean, I told them the first thing I learned, the first time I ever came up on a stage, when I was, shall we say, nervous. I said, it really makes no difference whether you're nervous. Just put a fucking smile on your face, and your emotions will follow. And it turns out, excuse my language, by the way, I'm an R-rated speaker. I may have neglected to mention that at the beginning, and I know that Chris is now really cursing the day he invited me, but hey, it's too late, isn't it? But it does turn out to be the case that in large part my success and the success of